welcome to the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and anyone ready to uplevel their career in their own damn way. I'm Des. I'm a life coach for women who get that having it all sometimes means having to balance the good and the bad, the sugar and the spikes, and all the in-between.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a therapist, and I'm all about helping as many people as possible to build awareness and make meaningful changes in their lives. I'm also dedicated to diversity and inclusion and increasing access to mental health care.
Between the two of us, we have 4 master's degrees and thousands of hours helping people develop balance, confidence, and clarity on their terms. So let's get started. And we'll just go on in.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm Des.
And I'm Tammy.
And today we have a really awesome guest that I'm super stoked to have with us. Kimberly Borges. I should have asked you beforehand. Is that how I say your last name?
That's okay. Kimberly Borges. Yes.
Borges. Okay, cool. With Moxie the Label, and pretty much when I saw what she was doing, I was like, oh my God, you have to come on the podcast.
Absolutely.
So to kind of open it, why don't you just kind of give us some background about who you are, Moxie the Label, and all the really fun, good stuff?
Yeah. So my name is Kimberly. I grew up in Hawaii. I have a very unusual, I think, but actually maybe a little bit more typical than a lot of people think. History of childhood, of growing up with a lot of trauma, a lot of struggle. My biological father left when I was about 5. He and my mom had like a very toxic, abusive relationship. Actually, he left before that. My mom got remarried when I was 5. My stepdad adopted myself and my sister. And so he was like legally our father, and we grew up with him as our dad. He was an authoritarian, strict person who was, as it turns out, mentally unstable, but we didn't know that growing up. And so I rebelled against a lot of like the rules that he had in our house, which were like, he put a tap on our phone because we weren't allowed to talk on the phone, and he put tape recorders in our closet, and you know, so I really rebelled against that, and I was just told that I was like a really bad kid, and I just wasn't obedient, and there was something wrong with me. And so I was a teenage runaway. I got sentenced to like a lockup facility until I was 18 because I was running away from home and, you know, partying and doing all those like rebellious things that go along.
All the things that teenagers do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So it came from a place of like, I wanted my freedom because I had a justified logical reason for wanting that. But then it really went into a lot of unhealthy decisions on my part as well too, along with all of those things that teenagers do. So yeah, like my 20s was spent a lot of my 20s was spent soul searching and trying to figure out who I was. I traveled the world. I worked a ton of different jobs, you know, and I would have like periods of massive growth, and then I'd have a lot of self-sabotage, and then a lot of like massive growth and then self-sabotage. So that was pretty much my 20s. And then my late 20s, things kind of shifted a little bit more for me. I got really, really into personal development. I started to understand the way that trauma actually physically like affects our bodies and how it changes like down to our cells. And so I studied the work of Peter Levine, who's a trauma therapist or researcher, and really understanding that like a lot of the ways that I was existing in the world and I felt guilt and shame over it was not my fault. And so really letting go of the shame allowed me to heal. Like I was trying to do it backwards. Like I was trying to shame myself into healing, but I really just let go of the shame, and then I could heal.
Yeah.
And so Moxie the Label kind of started in the last presidential election.
Okay.
I kept seeing like statement t-shirts that were really politically charged. And I would like, in my mind, I would create other statements. I'd be like, oh, that one's cool, but like, I'd really like to see like this quote or like these words, you know, on like a shirt. And so I was like designing them in my head. And then that slowly kind of changed from being really politically centered to being more about sharing our stories and talking about our struggles and healing from trauma, and just putting that out there that like trauma isn't shameful, and it's a lot more common than people think.
Yeah.
And we need to like create a space for talking about it without the shame. And so, what's, more representative of saying like, I'm not ashamed of like things that I went through than like wearing a statement t-shirt that says trauma isn't shameful. Right.
Right. Absolutely.
And that was, so when I saw, there were 2 shirts that I saw, where I was like, oh my God, yes. The Feel Your Feelings one.
Yep.
That you have. And I was like, yes, I love that, because we say that on the podcast all the time. But also the Trauma Isn't Shameful shirt.
Yeah.
And that was when I was like, I have to talk to her. I have to know this girl. Like, she's so kick-ass and amazing, for putting something just so bold out there.
Yeah.
Like, trauma is something that I think there's such a shadow around, in that, like, society knows it happens, but no one's actually going to talk about it.
It's kind
like,
of
it's
avoided
still,
and kind of whispered about and hinted at, but
it's
not
very,
really explicitly.
very much that like 50s housewife, like hushed whisper type of thing that's going on right now.
Yeah.
And I think just like bringing it to the forefront, like going back to that shame piece, like it takes away a lot of the shame, because I feel like if we look at what trauma is, most people have experienced some sort of trauma, but you feel weird having those responses because you don't know like how common it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think that like we're very much okay with trauma once it's resolved. Like we want to know, like people want to know my story because I've like, gone through it. But I really like try to, when people are just like, they just want to know the pot of gold at the end of the, the rainbow kind of like thing, like what's the end goal. But I really try to like, I think shift it and like, no, like, let's talk about like the hard part of it. Like, cause that's what you can cope with, So yeah. Wait, did you have a question? Did I miss a question?
No, not at all. We're
that
just
was
totally
great.
agreeing with you.
And so one thing that I did notice, is you do some coaching, right?
Yeah. So, launching Moxie last year kind of turned into me becoming a brand coach. And I think it was because people saw my journey of launching Moxie and going from sort of just like a really small, inspirational through Instagram, like inspirational account, but then like creating a business out of that. And so I kept getting people that wanted to pick my brain and to have coffee with me. And so little did I know I was coaching everyone for free. So yeah, I've been working with a coach for about a year. And so through that work, I think that I've really been able to step in, like I was really hesitant to step into the role of being a brand coach. But now I'm like fully owning it, and I've got a brand academy, because like what else would be like more powerful than like having somebody, being able to help somebody like me who has a really powerful story, who's gone through like a lot of struggle, and to help them turn that story into a business and a brand that not only elevates their life, but helps them change other lives. Like there's nothing better than that. And so like, it didn't, when you like look back at like connecting the dots of your life, it makes perfect sense. You're like, oh duh, like I love story. Like I love helping people. Like I love help people to be able to help people. So like, it makes perfect sense. But when you're looking forward, you're like, how can I go from, having a statement t-shirt company to being a brand coach? Like that doesn't even make any sense. But like really owning that. And in retrospect, you're like, oh yeah. Hey universe, you know what you're doing. Right?
Well, I think it just says too that like we just don't know, right? We just don't know the twists and turns and the possibilities that things can happen in our lives that can be really meaningful and unexpected.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For folks listening, like I know there are so many types of coaches that fall under like business coach, life coach, copywriting coach, all these things. Can you tell all the listeners kind of explicitly like what a brand coach is and how it's like separate and your take on it? I know you started to touch on it, but I mean, if you have like maybe some more in-depth thoughts or things on that piece.
Yeah. So me specifically, I think there's a lot of different types of brand coaches and sort of like what their specialty is. Like I'm obsessed with story and what people have the experience, the knowledge that they had because of what they've gone through, because of their life experiences, and really understanding how to hone that story, how to craft that story in a way that connects with other people and make it a cohesive story that you're telling, cohesive brand through all of the different platforms that you are engaging with, so that you can then serve your audience either through a product or through a service. So I also specialize, or my niche is like newbie like bosses or newbie CEOs, like people that are just about to launch. Cause that's like what I went through, is like, I was a new business owner and I didn't really know what I was doing. And so that's like the person, my ideal client is who I want to help, is someone who's also in that place feeling a little bit lost. And I'm like, I got you. I know how you're feeling.
Totally. Yeah. Kind of to that piece, like, what do you think is the biggest piece, or what have you seen be the biggest piece that people kind of struggle with when it comes to sharing their story? And this can be branding, it can be their personal story. I'll leave it kind of open. But
well, for me, I think that one, like, your brand is your personal story. Like you are your brand is you. I think people get really discombobulated when they try to separate the two, and then they feel disconnected from, their business and then their life, and how does it all tie together? So I think owning and feeling confident that our brand is our business, and that our story is strong enough to be a business and to be a brand. And I think that the fears that people have that get in their way are, one, that they don't have a story, or that their life is like uninteresting, or that they're like, the flip side of that is that they're too much. Like they're like, who wants to hear about like all of this like shit that happened in my life? I'm allowed to swear on this podcast?
Oh, yes, please do.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Fuck yeah.
Yes. Okay. Like all of this shit, like it's just like all of the dirty muck that they had to go through. They're like, that's messy and it's gross and it's ugly, and people are like, who wants to hear that? Like, I don't want to air my dirty laundry. And so I think that is a fear that a lot of people have, but really that's what makes you relatable to other people. And that's like the humanity that other people connect to, that when they are going to, buy a product or acquire services of some sort, they're not going to do it because your packaging looks pretty. They're going to do it because they connected with you in like a deep way, whether they're like aware, like consciously aware of it or not. So I think, like the story aspect of either they don't think that they have a story that's worth telling, or they think that it's too much, is a fear. And I also think that people feel like they're being annoying a lot. Like they don't want to like talk about themselves too much. It feels like they're being like,
like the braggy type of thing.
Yeah. So they like are like, oh, people are gonna think that I'm narcissistic, or like I just talk about myself all the time. So then they don't talk about themselves, and they're not consistent with it, and so then nobody knows what they're doing because they're not consistent with it. I mean, and that's partly like the algorithms of like Instagram and Facebook. Like you've got to like be out there to like get people's attention. And so if you're afraid of like annoying people, then you're not going to be in front of enough people to see like what it is that you're doing.
Well, and I think the thing is I forget who said it. I think it's one of the more well-known coaches online, but I can't remember who, so I can't attribute it. But it's not my own thought. But the idea of if you're not willing to brag about yourself, no one else will be. Like, own your shit, own your awesome, like step up, because no one is as invested into you and your brand as you are. And if you don't feel like it's worth talking about, no one else is going to care either.
Exactly.
So I think that's something that when I work with clients and stuff around it, that's one thing that we talk about, because, you know, I like a lot of my clients say the same thing, like, well, I don't want to like be too bold. I don't want to like step up and, you know, really own this. I'm like, you have to, like, there are very few things in life that you have to do. And one thing is like owning what you do and really like speaking to it.
But I think that's something we're not really taught to do, right? Like when we're growing up, we're taught to be modest, like don't talk about yourself. And so sometimes any attention on you just feels like too much when really it's like this little sliver of attention that doesn't even register, right? So whatever you think is too much, you have to like overdo it even that much more to have any effect.
Okay, but I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say your ideal client, female.
Yes.
We're 3 women sitting here talking about it.
Yeah.
Let's bring a guy in and see how he feels about writing about what he does.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
You probably do it.
Yeah. I think that it's definitely cult, like societally, there's a dichotomy there. There's a
very
divide.
much a
absolutely.
Yeah, like go stand in your place, and like for the women, like go stand in your place, and for the guys, go get your trophy. You know,
right?
Like, so when you're working with women, right, you have to overcome that kind of ingrained societal message of stand in your corner and don't have the limelight, right? And so when they step into owning it, it just feels so unnatural and so overdone. But when they really do it, it's really empowering, right?
Yeah. And I think that goes back to story with what we were talking about in terms of like the things that you've gone through in life and everything, and the trauma piece, even in like once you're able to understand that, then there's almost this inherent confidence of I've come through this. I can own it and stand in it, and I'm so strong. You know, like if we don't have these platforms, like I know on Moxie the Label's website, there's a tell your story piece, and you're giving women like a platform to share their personal stories, and there's so much power in that.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak a bit to the to what you're doing with helping women like share their story on the website? And I don't know if it connects with your Insta or not, but maybe
with my what?
Maybe like I'm not sure if the stories connect with your Instagram presence or anything like that.
I just had this like Moxie the Label was my baby, but I didn't want to make it about me. I wanted to really make it about other people's stories and have other, you know, to give a voice and a space to all of our stories as like a collective. And so I reached out to some women in my life and had some women reach out to me that wanted to be featured, that were really brave enough to like share what they had been through. And the point of it is not going into it and creating the Tell Your Story blog. I was really hesitant because it was like delicate to not play so much into being a victim and like lamenting on that, but really like how what are tangible ways and resources and methods that they used to heal themselves to get to a better place, so that it was basically like a blueprint or a map for other people reading those stories and like having like an arsenal of like, okay, well, this person did, you know, meditation and therapy, and then this person did ayahuasca, and this person did like fitness, and like all of these things like helps them recover and heal. And so let me try this. Okay, that didn't work. Let me try this one. Okay, that one kind of worked. Let me try something else. Like, you know, and so that was like the idea behind the Tell Your Story blog. Yeah. And it's been really awesome. I've kind of shifted that a little bit from the blog, and now I've got more like video interviews in my Facebook group called So She Did. And so there's like an interview series, So She Did Tell Her Story. And so I've been interviewing women on there, which is like a little bit I'm not sure if I'm going to continue with the blog. I was kind of like experimenting and doing both. I really like the interactive, like, you know, face-to-face time with it. Yeah, it's like really, I don't know, I think really powerful to like speak with these women directly and have people be able to like watch them and see them.
Absolutely. And it gives people kind of, I like what you said, because we were talking about this on another episode of the podcast that we were just recording about giving people options. Like you can't just have one way. And so if you give people like, here's all these things and you can try them out and see what works for you and what you really connect with, I think you can reach more people that way rather than saying, well, there's just this one way.
Right. Yeah. Kind of like with marketing. Like,
Yes.
You like market, and like you're like, oh, let me do a webinar, let me do a challenge, let me do like a Facebook. Like you kind of have to like see what you like and what feels good to you, but also like what works with your audience. There's not just like one way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is with coping skills and with marketing, if it doesn't feel good, you're not going to keep it up and it's completely unsustainable. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. It has to feel good to you. Like can't force yourself like into like a box, be like, well, this is the way that everyone is doing it, so this is the way that I have to do it. Like that mentality just doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, totally. Any final thoughts, Tammy? Or?
No, I just really appreciate it. When she sent it to me, I was like, oh, I hadn't heard of this before. And I went on your site and I was like, this is amazing. This is really incredible, because as a therapist, I work with people who have experienced quite a lot of trauma. And so I really appreciate that there's somebody out there saying, hey, tell your story. This is not shameful. You can be empowered and you can heal and go forward. So.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
So if folks want to find you, connect with any of like the number of things you're doing, because you're kicking so much ass and doing all the things, where can people go? How can they find you?
They can go to my website. It's KimberlyBorges.com. They can email me at hello@KimberlyBorges.com, or they can follow me on Instagram. I love Instagram. Instagram is my jam. That one is at the Kimberly Borges.
Great. And I'll have those links in our show notes.
Perfect.
Because spellings and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Kimberly, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us and give us some insight about all the things.
Yeah, all the things. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Okay. So that wraps up this episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'd also like to thank Forget the Whale for use of their song Move Along as our theme music. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and let the whole world know how good this shit is by leaving a review. It would mean so, so, so much. Also, don't forget to get your free stress layer training by going to DesireeW.com and clicking on Slay Your Stress. You'll also find a link to that in the show notes below. Till next time, and remember to stay unavailable for fuckery.